we can start, and if people will join us, they'll just join in the middle. Feel free all through our conversation to write questions on the chat. If you had any, open your mic and ask. We're not too big of a group, so it will be okay if you can just interrupt me. I will start by saying that when I started planning it, it was one situation, and this morning I had to do some changes to the presentation because of all kind of developments or lack of developments, let's say it like that. So we'll talk about it as well when we get a bit farther along. So let's talk about our trilogy. As you can see, this is the results of our election trilogy. And we'll go over them for a second just to see what happened and what was the development. So if you'll see the first election of April 19, we had 65 seats out of 120 to the right wing, which include the ultra-Orthodox, Shas and UTJ, the right bloc, which includes the Likud and the New Right, or the Beit Yehudi, Yamina, it changed name through the period, and Israel Beitenu, that was in the government before those elections. Which seems to be very easy to create a right-wing government. The left wing had 55 seats, and that was very, very easy government to create, at least on paper. Now, as you know from the process of a government in Israel is that every party is going after the election to the president to say who they want to be prime minister. The person with the most people recommending him gets the chance to create a government. So in the first election, we had 65 people recommending of Benjamin Netanyahu and 45 people recommending on Benny Gantz. Why 45 people and not 55? Because the Arab party for ages, for a really long time, never recommended anyone to be prime minister. As part of their perception of the Israeli government, and them saying we're outside, we have our own agenda, we're not part of any government, which they weren't ever a part of government. They did support once for Rabin's government. That was the last time the Arabs really supported some kind of a government. And 65 people recommended on Benjamin Netanyahu. You need 61 people in order to have a function government. You need to have a vote in the Knesset and most of the Knesset voting for you. So it seemed to be very easy for Bibi to create a government in April 19th in our first election. But then Lieberman with Israel Beitenu, the 5 seats, decided that he have an issue with the Haredi, or at least that was the excuse. No one really knows what happened then, and that's, I think, the biggest mystery of our trilogy. What happened with Avigdor Lieberman and Israel Beitenu? Why did he decide not to go with Bibi? And again, he found a lot of excuses. His excuses was that the Haredi have too much power and law for drafting Orthodox or Haredic people into the army wasn't as he wished, and they negotiated on it until the last minute. Everybody was sure it's just some kind of a trick that he does to get more power, and eventually he'll support his government, and he didn't. He was very strong with it and decided not to. Bibi had only 60 seats, and with 60 seats, you can't have a government. You need a majority. 60 seats for and 60 against isn't a majority. So Bibi, instead of how the law goes, if you can't create a government after 28 days, an extension of 14 that he get, then the mandate is going back to the president to give it to someone else. Bibi did some trick and voted with Lieberman and with some of the Arab parties to dissolve the Knesset and go directly to another election. So that's what happened in April, and then we went to September. And in September, the political map completely changed, and it was a big change. As you can see, from 65 to the right, they decreased to only 55. The 55 actually decreased from 60 to 55, still a huge change. 5 seats last to the Haredi, to the Likud, and to Yamina. Lieberman, which became completely on the fence, had 8 seats, again, increasing from 5 to 8, and the left wing increasing from 55 to 57. As you can see, the Arab was the largest change, from 10 seats to 13. From our experience before, you can guess that, okay, so Gantz will have 44 seats and Bibi have 55, and he can get the mandate. The difference was that part of the Arabs said, no, we are supporting Gantz, we're recommending for the president to have Gantz as prime minister. Why only part of them? Because the list itself is a joint list, it's 3 different lists. And one of it still said, we're not supporting anyone. They're really extremists that don't really believe in a Jewish state. So they say, we're not supporting Gantz. We don't give our votes, even not for the president, just to recommend him to have the chance. So he got 54 seats, 54 people recommending on him. Bibi got 55, and Lieberman said, I'm not recommending on anyone. Bibi had his 28 days to try and create a government. He did any try he could to convince Lieberman, to convince any parties from the left wing, failing one time after the other. And then Gantz had his chance to try and create some kind of a government, trying very hard to get his 54, 57 seats plus the 8 of Lieberman, and then getting him over 60 seats. The problem there was that Lieberman said, I'm not going to be a part of a government or support a government that is joining with the Arabs. And the Arabs said the same. We're not going to support a government that have something to do with Lieberman because he's racist, because the sayings that he had in the previous years about the Arabs and about the Arab representative. Gantz did anything he could to try and somehow change it, with no success whatsoever. His days of the mandate ended, and then the Knesset had 21 days to find someone else. When the Knesset failed as well, here we are, the third election. Third election, again, big surprise, big change in the votes. When the right wing went from 55 to 58 seats, very close again to the 60, but not the 60 that they had in the first election. The left wing went down from 57 to 55, and Lieberman went down 1 vote. So we could expect again that from our previous experience, Gantz will get the support or the recommendation of the left bloc, plus some of the Arabs, 12, which means 52. And Bibi will get all the 58, and he'll have the chance to create a new government. And the surprise was, or not the surprise, but because you could see it happening during the time, I saw, Fern, that you're raising your hand in a second. I'll just finish that part. So the surprise was that Lieberman and all the Arabs, including the extremists, went to the president and say, we want Gantz to be the prime minister. And Gantz had 62 people recommending for him as a prime minister. And that's a huge, huge change. Because, okay, you have 62 seats, 62 people that recommend, you'll be the president, you'll be the prime minister, you can create a government, you have more than 60. Yeah, Fern, you can unmute yourself and ask.
Yes, but I read in the New York Times yesterday or the other day that Gantz actually said he'd be willing to work with Netanyahu now.
Yeah, so we'll get to it in a second.
Okay.
That's what happened. The election, Gantz had actually 62 people recommending him, and he had the option to become prime minister. Now, what was the problem? The problem is that even though we have 8 lists that were elected to the Knesset, as you can see here, each list is in each list, we have a couple of other lists. It's actually joint between a couple of lists, some of them because of the threshold. The threshold in the Knesset is 4 seats. So if you expect not to get 4 seats or more, you need to join with other parties. That's what happened in the Arab joint list. That have 4 different parties inside of them. Balad being the most extremist one, the one that you don't support a Jewish state. The Labor, Gesher, Meretz have 7 seats, but it's actually 4 different parties. It's Labor that got 3 seats, Meretz that got 2 seats, 1 independent, Yair Golan, and Gesher who got 1 seat. Kahol Lavan, again, it's 3 different lists. It's Chosen LeIsrael, which got 15 seats, Yesh Atid, Chosen LeIsrael, it's Gantz party, that's the core Gantz party. Yesh Atid, which is Yair Lapid, and Telem, which is Boogie Elon, that got 5 seats. Israel Beitenu, it's only 1 list, 7 people. Likud, actually a couple of lists, but now they're 1 list. They don't consider themselves as a couple of lists. The meaning is that the fact that you're going to the election as a joint list means that you can dissolve whenever you want. You're still independent inside of the bigger party. Yamina, which have 6 seats, but 3 parties, the New Right with 3 seats, Abait HaYehudi with 1 seat, and Eichud HaLeumi with 2, Shas with 9 seats, and United Torah Judaism with 7. Now, very complicated, but if we'll just make it a bit easier, we can see that eventually the left wing and Gantz have 62 seats, Bibi have 58 seats. Seems to be very easy to create a government. But the problem is that we have a government that's supported by the Arab list, and all the media, all the right-wing media bashed Gantz, and everyone in that list, don't do it. Don't go and build a government with Arabs that don't support Israel. Now, Gantz's plan was not to create a government with them, just to create a government with the Labor and Kahol Lavan, which means 40 seats, but the Arabs and Israel Beitenu supporting them from outside, which means they're raising their hand to support the government in the first voting, but they're not part of the government. They don't have ministers, they're not continuing. Very hard to create a government that way, but he said, okay, if we'll do it, then other people from the right wing will join us to a united government. The reason that he didn't succeed, or he couldn't really get the 62 people voting for him, is the 2 members of Telem, of his own party, said, we won't vote for a government when they are voting for it as well. Joining them was another one from Gesher, Orly Levy Abekassis, that said, I won't support a government that the Arabs support. Not that the Arabs are part of, that the Arabs support. which brings him instead of 62 to 59 seats. Now, still, 59 is bigger than 58 because they didn't said that they will support Bibi. But then Orly Levy said, yeah, I'll support them. And not only abstain in the voting, I'll actually vote against this government, would become a tie of 59. And then Gantz was in kind of a place where, he don't have any way to actually create a government. The solution was to build a method of a roadmap to the government. To start by, first of all, taking control of the Knesset, of all the committees, the major committees in the Knesset, then taking control of the Speaker of the Knesset, and then do some legislation that a person with indictment cannot create a government, which obviously we can all understand that it's not just a general law, but very, very specific law against Bibi. And then he won't have any choice. It's a big question if it's a real optional law, because the Supreme Court, if anyone will go and try to object the law in the Supreme Court, probably the Supreme Court say that it's not legal legislation because it's personal, and that's a problem. That was the hope, and they succeeded in the first step of taking control of the committees on the Knesset. They tried to get to voting the chair of the Speaker of the Knesset, when Bibi and the right-wing government doing everything they can in order to postpone the voting. Kahol Lavan went to the Supreme Court to enforce the Speaker of the Knesset, the current Speaker of the Knesset, Yuli Edelstein, to get the voting to replace him. He said, I'm not doing it until we have a government, because as soon as we'll choose a Speaker of the Knesset that will be against the coming government, we cannot operate. A very important thing to understand, you cannot change a Speaker of the Knesset unless he resigns. So if you choose someone, that's it. It's for all the Knesset unless he resigns. And if he's not part of the government parties, then he's against, and it's hard to create anything. He'll say, we'll vote on it after we'll have a government. And the Supreme Court says, sorry, no, you have 2 days to do it. And a couple of hours before his 2 days ended, he said, I'm resigning from my role, so I don't need to actually do what the Supreme Court said. Not correct, because he's still in power for 48 hours, so we still didn't do the Supreme Court order. The Speaker of the Knesset refused to do a Supreme Court order, which is a huge democracy issue. But then they found some loophole solution and chose a temporary Speaker of the Knesset and chose a new one. The idea was to choose Meir Cohen. Meir Cohen is part of Yesh Atid. Bibi were very clear and told Gantz, if you choose him, there is no way we're going to unity. And this time we need unity. And after a lot of negotiation behind the scene, when Yesh Atid chair and Telem chair, Boogie Yalon, which was the head of the military, and Yair Lapid tried to push Gantz to continue and try to create a minority government. And on the other side, the chair of Shas, Aryeh Deri, and Gabi Ashkenazi, who again was the head of the military and part of Kahol Lavan, tried to convince him it's time to get a unity government, and if you're choosing someone that the right won't agree with, no more unity government. Eventually, Gantz decided that he wants to create a unity government, and he's going to put himself as the candidate to be the Speaker of the Knesset. And he was elected by the votes of all the right wing, all the 58 seats, and Chosen L'Israel. The second that he did it, Kahol Lavan broke into pieces. Broke into many pieces, okay? In Chosen L'Israel 15, Yesh Atid 14, Telem broke in two different. 3 of them stay intact, and 2 of them got separated and created a new list. So Netanyahu succeeded in the first goal that he had, which means to break Kahol Lavan into fractions. And he succeeded by that. Now, why Gantz really did it? It's a good question. He says that his slogan in all during the election was Israel first. And now the situation needs a unity government because of the corona, because of the economical crisis that we're going to have, because everything. And he knew that if he's going to elect Meir Cohen from Yesh Atid, we're going to have a 4th election, and we can't have 4th election now. With the corona situation, there's no way to do election. Physically, there's no way to do it. So it will create constitutional issues and many others. And in the meantime, Bibi is still prime minister. Other people think that he just, the pressure that he had from the right wing not to create a government supported by the Arabs got into him. And eventually he decided that. Now, the situation is that we have the 58 of the right wing. We have Gesher that also joined already the 58, which made 59. We have Chosen L'Israel. We have Derech Eretz that got separated from Telem. And we have 2 ministers from the 3 of 2 Knesset members from the 3 of the Labor that also say they will join the government. So we have 78 seats currently, which means easy government, we don't have any problems. All the issue with the Speaker of the Knesset was almost a week ago. And we still don't have a government, even though the need of emergency government due to the situation, we still don't have any. Now, why is that? First of all, there is the issue of the size of the government. The negotiation currently talks about doing an equal government, which means the 58 seats of the right will get certain amount of ministers, and the 20 that we have for the left will get the same number of ministers. Talking currently between 30 to 34 ministers, which means 17 ministers for 20 people in the left. Currently, the government is 19 ministers. And all of that in order to get everyone satisfied. A lot of criticism from all sides of the political maps that we can't have that big of a government, definitely not in this situation. This economical crisis that we have, to spend money for nothing just to give people more jobs make no sense. And in the right, on the other side, means that some of the smaller party, like Yamina, will get maybe only 1 minister or 2 ministers, but not important. Currently, Yamina have 4 very major ministers because they had a lot of power in the Netanyahu government, because without them, there's no government. When there are only 6 of 78, they're not that important, so they can lose a lot of power, and that's one. The second one is a question of who will be the minister. And that goes mostly to the Minister of Law. When the Likud want to hold a minister, the Kahol Lavan also want that one of their Knesset member will be the minister. the compromise will maybe to bring someone from outside, but still have the decision together. And why is it so important for the Likud and mostly for Bibi? Because this minister is going to choose judges, 6 new judges in the next couple of years. It's going to choose the head of the prosecution in Israel. And again, we need to remember that Bibi is indicted and his trial was supposed already to start, but because of the corona was delayed into May, and no one knows if it will actually start in May. But that's very big part of the issue. Who's going to be the Speaker of the Knesset? Because the Likud wants it to be again Yuli Edelstein, that was the Speaker, and Kahol Lavan says no. He said no, very firmly no, to the Supreme Court, and we can't have someone that is so anti-Supreme Court to be the Speaker of the Knesset. We need someone that can actually do it. And also the Ministry of Health that now became an issue. Currently, the Minister of Health is Litzman from United Torah Judaism, which a lot of people have a lot of criticism about his way of dealing with this crisis, saying some things like, we're hoping that the Messiah will be here by Passover and everything will end, and saying that he's old and in danger, so he won't get into the Knesset anymore. Things like that really worries people, and we need someone that can actually do it. And Kahol Lavan needs a reasoning to actually join this government under Bibi. And if the situation is a crisis, then they need at least to take the Ministry of Finance or Economical Minister or Health Minister. And none of them they actually demanded. So that's also a big issue. The government guidelines that are still in question, mostly around the annexation of the West Bank. When Gantz says we don't want to do anything, even if United States agree, if it's not in a wider agreement, and the right wing says we want annexation now, before the election in the United States, and that's a big issue now. Sorry. And everything that have to do with the legislation branch and balancing between the different authorities in Israel. A lot of pressure from the right and from the left. The left says everything you promised is not being under Bibi and not letting Bibi with all of his indictments stay in power, and now you're going to do just that. All the social media in the days that he decided or said that he's going to join the government was, crisis and people crying. It's worse than the corona. We can't believe that that's what happened. Really taking it hard because we're a year of everything have to do with yes Bibi or not Bibi, and now you're going with Bibi. Even that was all your campaign. And from the right saying, we don't want a left party that Netanyahu has. We want a right party. And if you're giving the security minister, the law minister, and every important power that we have, and canceling all the changes that we want to do, no annexation, no change in power for the legislation branch. We don't want this government. It's a left government where us is just standing there. And the last one, and that's the biggest question, and that's what people now start to think again. Bibi is planning something behind the scene, because now after he broke down all the parties of the left to their pieces, he can just say, okay, I don't need all of them. I have 58. I can take the 2 of the Cheret and the 1 of Gesher, and I have 61. I can take the two of the Liber as well. I have 63. That's a huge government. I don't need Chosn Israel. And that's, Bibi known as a person that never actually promise and do. He promises and then find an excuse to get back from what he promised. The only power that Gantz have currently is the fact that he's the Speaker of the Knesset. And if there is going to be a government without him, he's going to challenge that very strongly. And the Knesset still have power if the head of the Knesset, the Speaker of the Knesset, is not from the government. Gantz have 2 more weeks to create a government. Then it will go to Bibi, which means we still have something like 6 weeks for a chance to a government to be established. Bibi known to wait for the last second in order to really decide on what he's doing. So he might wait all these 6 weeks and not, the urgency of the crisis is not his urgency. He's in power and he's doing whatever he wants. And that will even show Gantz as less person of his word, because eventually he'll join the government, but not really in the crisis time, but a couple of weeks after. Fern, you have a question?
Yeah, it's the mute and unmute. What is the equivalent of the Speaker of the House in the US government? Because I'm not sure I truly understand that position in Israel.
I'm not sure if there is an equivalent. It's maybe like Nancy Pelosi. I think that's the equivalent, more or less. He has a lot of power. He's in charge of everything, of the schedule of the Knesset. So when he don't want, he can decide that some voting won't go to the Knesset, or what will be the order, what will get prioritized and what not. Usually when he's part of the government, of the parties that are in the government, he's doing as the government say. But if he's not, he can, put a lot of blocks for the government and make her work much, much harder. So as I said, when I planned this lecture to begin with, we were pretty sure that there's going to be a government. Pretty sure that it's going to be actually an easy government. Everyone predicted that Monday we'll already have government. Currently, no one knows. There's a lot of mistrust between everyone there. And everyone knows that everyone is speaking behind the scene. Now there's a lot of voices inside of Chosn Israel to get back and try to get the 62 somehow. And if needed, even go for 4th election. Bibi is not afraid of 4th election. He thinks that the crisis will just make him stronger, and as long as there is no new government, he's still the prime minister. So he's not afraid of it. But something did change in this year, and it's very interesting changes, I think. First of all is the change in the Arab party's involvement. Also in the percentage of voting inside of the Arab society. We saw from 10 seats a year ago to 15 seats in this election, 50% more. That's a huge, huge change. And beside that, the fact that all of them supported Gantz in the recommendation for the president this election is incredible. It's something no one predicted will happen. They actually want to be part of the game, finally, I have to say. And that's a huge change. That means that there might be part of a government in the foreseen future. Even now, when they talk about government of Bibi and Gantz, they talk that maybe they'll get a minister, an Arab minister, because the government can have a third of the ministers that are not Knesset members, that are just people that they're choosing. So they can choose someone from the Arab society to have the minority minister, for example. Carol, you had something to ask?
I have two questions. Is the opposition to, is it opposition to Arabs per se, or because the joint list is comprised of such a diverse range of opinions, some of whom are fairly radically anti-Israel? Is the first question. And the second is, why do the Arabs themselves, why would they not want to participate, at least some of them, not all of them, but why wouldn't the less radical of them want to participate in the government and have a minister?
So first of all, depends who you ask. I think that some people in the political system see all the Arab representatives, not the Arab society. The Arab Party represented the Knesset members as a lot of people say, terror supporters. And it doesn't matter which one of them. All of them are the same. Some will say that, again, most of them are okay with a Jewish state and just care about the minorities, care also a lot about the Palestinian issue. And some of them, mostly Balad, is an extremist that don't want a Jewish state. And that's why we can't get their support. And if we get their support, it's, creating a government with a support that someone that don't believe. Others will say, and I just had a Zoom meeting with Tzipi Livni yesterday, and she said, well, I don't care. I don't support them. They support me. They supported Gantz. It doesn't mean that Gantz supports them. And if they decided they want to support Gantz, that's meaningful. That means that they had some change. And for the second question, for years, most of our party says we don't want to be part of the government because you have a liability on every member of the government have a liability to every decision. And for the same reason, the ultra-Orthodox were never part of the government. The fact that we have now one of them as a minister of health, it's a change. It's a change because the Supreme Court says you can't have a deputy minister without a minister. And they decided they're doing it, but they said that every time the government decides to approve work on Shabbat, it means that this person is also liability for it. He has a liability for it. And as an ultra-Orthodox, he's not willing to do it. The same as our parties. They say every time, there's annexation talk or attack against Gaza, we're also in liability for it, and we don't want it. I think that there is a change. Ayman Uda, that's now the chair of the Arab Unity, the United Arab List, he said that he wants to be part of the government. That is his will, and that's what he wishes. I think that that's the next step, and I think that's the part of the reason more and more Arab actually go and voted, because they said, we want to have an influence. We don't want to sit on the bench anymore. We want to be part of the government. We want the government to pay attention to our needs as well. And that's a change in the way that their representative talks. And one very interesting thing about just this election, that for the first time, we have a woman Knesset member from the Islamic movement. It's not just an Arab woman, it's from the Islamic movement, which is huge. It's a huge change. The equivalent is if we'll have women in one of the Haredic list, in one of the ultra-Orthodox list. So they beat the ultra-Orthodox in that sense. And that's really a big change. And we see the change in this year in the Arab society and their approach to the government. And the second is, and that was very surprising to everyone, the fact that the voting rates just went higher and higher from one election to the other. When everybody thought that people would just say, no, I don't care anymore, I had enough of it, people want to use their right to vote and want to have some influence on the government. The problem is that people are very, very much stick to their own opinion and don't change it as much. The changes are very, very small. The biggest thing I think we learn is that it's all personal. We don't know, no one knows why Lieberman decided not to go with Bibi, but it's something personal. We don't know exactly what was all the things that Gantz considered when he decided to make this move, but it's all personal. It's personal influence from Deri and from Ashkenazi, and not from Yair Lapid and Bougie. It's very, very personal, and you can see it. That's the major. The politics became more people's and not values, and that's very, very interesting phenomenon that I think happened worldwide, but it's new to the Israeli government. Most of the parties became parties that have one leader, that he chooses all the other Knesset members. There's no primaries anymore, except for the Likud and Meretz. Meretz has 2 seats. That's not really a party, sorry to say it. And also the Labor. The other one is a question. Is it the end of the Labor and the Israeli left? The Labor, the party that established Israel, that in 2015, Bougie Herzog and Tzipi Livni had 24 seats together, and now have 3 seats. All the left parties that say we are left have 6 seats in the Knesset. That's it. Okay, it's 5% of the Knesset is left. On the contrary, we have the Arabs now that are really being part. And the fact that they're being part means that they maybe be real part of the left bloc. And the second thing, I think that most of the voting in the last elections, the last 3 elections, were again very personal. No one voted for values. People voted yes or no Bibi. And the option for no Bibi was blue and white and not the left party. Now that blue and white dissolved, a lot of people from the left will go back there. The left wing have to have a deep discussion, a big thinking of where they're at. And I think that in the last couple of years, they tried to show themselves as more right than the right in order to get voters from the right, because the perspective, the understanding in Israel is that most Israelis are right-wing. I'm not sure if it's really the reality, because in all the surveys still the majority of Israel want a two-state solution. More of them are socialist and capitalist, so the values of the left is what the majority wants, but the voting goes to the right, and that's an interesting phenomena to understand. A lot of them are afraid to call themselves left because the media and the right said left is traitor. Like the left and the media made right is a settler. So that's really interesting. Carol, you had something to ask?
Yes, I have another question. In the earlier elections, the young people were more to the right as opposed to what happens in this country. Do you know how the vote this time broke out?
So no one really knows it. I don't know where do you get the statistics of that. It's surveys because they don't have a way to know which age group voted. I can say that a very surprising thing in all these three elections was that the absentee votes that are not actually absentee are mostly soldiers and official representative abroad, which usually were very, very right-wing, okay, because the military people are more right-wing, now became more to the center and left. Blue and white and the left parties got more votes there than the right, so maybe that. And the last year of changes, but the one thing that didn't change at all is that Bibi is still a prime minister. Now I have to say that I'm not as sure as I was Friday about the outcome and what's going to be in the next couple of weeks. My guess or estimation is that Bibi is going to be able to create a government with Chosen Israel. The idea of the government is that Bibi is going to be a prime minister for a year and a half, and then Gantz is going to be a prime minister for a year and a half. Bibi is going to be prime minister. After a year and a half, we'll probably, or a bit less, they'll find some reason for another election. That's my assumption. But the fact that Gantz and all the 20 Knesset members from the central left will be part of the government will make it a very, very status quo government with no major changes, not to the right and not to the left, not annexation, not big changes to the legislation system, more or less dealing with crisis and that's it. And we'll open it for other questions if you had.
So if no one else is going to ask, sorry, I don't mean to ask all the questions.
Fine.
But I mean, you know me, I just put it in the text box. Is
Yeah.
there any thought that Gantz just really does not want to be prime minister right now because, you know what, let Bibi handle this whole thing and the economic crisis, and you know what, I don't want to do it right now.
So I think it's more than that. People think that he just got cold feet. That he understands that it's too big for him. And he needs this year and a half to be under Bibi, to be his successor and also his replacer. The idea is for him to be the replacing him when he's abroad or anything else. And to learn, to have this year and a half to learn. A lot of people think that that's the issue. But again, there's so many forces, and my opinion as well is that Gabi Ashkenazi is there not only to push Gantz into this plan, but also looking at himself as the real successor of Bibi. He's a very, very strong candidate. He has a lot of things in his past that no one really knows from his time as the head of the military. But he's also stirring a lot there. Any other questions? Feel free just to unmute yourself. Okay. Paula?
I was just going to say thank you so much. This was really enlightening.
Pleasure. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Feel free. You have my email. You have my details. You have my phone. Call me. I'm available. And I'll keep you updated. Thank you. Bye, everyone.